what I want to do is look at how we connect to databases in Java. It's very similar here, just a few slight differences. And then I actually want to start building out what you might possibly use as a database for Twitter. Right? We won't have everything tonight, but we can get you started with just something basic. We can kind of go from there. So let me fire up XAMPP here, because we're going to need the MySQL server up and running. And then in D2L, I added a MySQL jar here. It's a zip file that has a single jar inside of it. Remember, these are just a package of Java classes. So just go download that, unzip it, and put it somewhere. Wherever you want to put it's fine. We can go move that jar around later, but we're going to need that in our projects as we go and start getting connected to databases. So we need the Apache server up and running too if we want to use the phpMyAdmin. So let me get this up and running here. Change my port number here, sorry. And we should be able to connect in here. We'll see how that goes. Maybe it'll load up here. It'll just take a minute. All right, so I'm going to build out, I've got one here from last time. I should build out another one, I apologize. So let me do a new database. Is that all right? We'll just call it Twitter 2. How about Twitter Winter 2022? How about that? All right, I'll make that database. And then here then, we need to start making some tables. So I'm going to make a table for, I want user first. Because what I want to do is an individual tweet needs to know which user posted it. And if I'm going to reference another user, I need that table to exist first. So I want a user table here, and we can figure out from here. So a couple options for users. It's not great all the time to use the username, which is like a string type, as a primary key, but you want to make sure everyone's usernames are unique. So one of the things we can do with that, I can just make a regular old ID field here and set it to auto increment, right, and make it be the primary key here. And then I can have a username field as some variable number of characters here. Where'd we go? Varchar. My goodness. Why can't I find it? Varchar, there it is. We'll say, I don't know, size 50 or something should be plenty here. If you want this one to be unique here, when you go to this index dropdown, you can pick unique. And this is, I don't know, username, sure. Actually, I think if we leave it blank, it auto-generates. So we'll just say go, and I think it'll be fine there. So this will make sure I don't have two users with the same username. Happy Blur today, White Paladin. Thanks for dropping in, my friend. Are you streaming tonight? We're doing database connectivity in JSP tonight. Oh yeah, awesome. More Elden Ring. That's going all right. Not too bad for a Thursday. It's, the weather was decent, not too much rain, so it's warming up here in Michigan. Fantastic. I'm tempted to get Elden Ring, but I don't think I've got enough time to actually go and really beat the game, and it's, you know, honestly almost as much fun just to watch other people kind of explore it. So, so we'll have an ID, we'll have a username. We're going to add in a password field. We can get back to this one later here, where we can figure out the right password stuff. But all right, we need this to be really big. So I'm just going to say like 250 because I forget exactly how large that one's going to hash. We're going to have to make sure it's large enough. But then essentially be able to log in. Yeah, you can definitely learn from other people exploring, and the scenery's gorgeous. They did some nice work there in that game, so it's pretty cool. We've got some game design classes here at the school too, which is neat. I think we only have 2 of them for like a game programming specialty, but it's not a skill of mine at all. I don't do any sort of like 3D modeling or anything interesting like that. But so we've got an ID field, we'll have a username, we'll have a password. Now ID will be our primary key, so we can reference that, and then we'll have username and password field so people can log in later. I think we should be in pretty good shape. We'll make that user table. And awesome, ID, username, password. And then we'll make another new table here for tweet. I'm sorry, so we need an ID field here. Again, this can just auto increment, makes life easy for us here for the ID of the tweet. And then what we need is like their text or their message or whatever it is here. And since we are in control here, this can be any number of characters you want. If you want to limit them to 120 characters, go for it. If you want to pick 250 characters, go for it. Doesn't matter here, right? This is our application, so we get to pick it all here. And then what we need is, how do we reference the user that posted? We're going to reference the user ID here. And then we're going to come back and add that as a foreign key in a little bit, so we don't add any other keys here. And we probably also need to know the time in which it was posted, right? So this is the, I don't know, time stamp, maybe? And we can pick a field here. We've got a timestamp field. Works out pretty well. You can do date and time. There's all sorts of interesting fields for this. Timestamp is probably the easiest for us to work with. And we can add in defaults if we want, or we can let the application do that. It's probably easiest to deal with that in the application. I don't know if people ever want to change it here, but we've got choices. Now, one word of warning, this timestamp thing is tricky here. It is done in UTC, so translating that to someone's local time is a whole other can of worms here. But if you're tracking time not as, hey, it's 3:49 p.m., if you're tracking from a specific time in UTC, this actually works out better for you because it's easier to convert. Because if I just say, hey, all my times are like 3, or what is it right now, 8:12 p.m., you don't know what time zone that is if you're not storing it like that. So you want to use these formats here that actually store that sort of information, versus the date and time doesn't keep any of that. It just says, okay, here's the day and here's the time. You don't know what time zone it was, which can run into all sorts of issues. So if I post something in East Coast and someone posts something in Central Time after me, it's going to look like they posted it before me, right? Because they're an hour ahead. Behind, right? It's 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or Central Time. Yeah. So timestamps where you're tracking with UTC is probably ideal here. We'll go ahead and save this one. Oops, we need a name here. So this is our tweet table. Sure, why not? Call it our tweet table. And then we're going to come in and go and view this relation view here. And we'll add, so in our table in tweet, the column for, no, I'm sorry, our column in here for user ID will match the user table ID field, to make sure that we're going to reference an existing user here, so we know which user did it. So we got tweets, we got users. We'll get some more tables in here a little bit later. This is enough for now. We haven't figured out the following thing yet, but we can get there later. That we don't need to tackle yet. So we've got the database Twitter winter 2022 Twitter winter. I think that was a mistake here. But now, how do we connect to it? So let's start up a new project. Here, we'll do our Java web project here, web application, and make sure I put this in the right directory. 2454 winter. I'm just going to call this our Twitter start here. And we'll say next. Great, uses our server. Fantastic, we don't need the frameworks. Great. So I had already downloaded that zip file here, this jar. You can go Google for it too, and you can download. There's actually an installer for it, which is fun, and you can keep it up to date. All sorts of other fun things here, but we've got the file, so I can go reference it here. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to libraries here. I'm going to add a jar, and for me, I just put it in my desktop, which is probably not the best place for it, but it's just for now. You know what? Actually, let me move it. Let me be better here. So instead of putting it on the desktop here, I'll take that and let's go put it in the GitHub repository. GitHub CIS2454. And you know what? I'm going to drop it in the Twitter Start project. Why not? I'll put it right in there inside of that project. So now when I right click and add a jar, I can go into my folder here for 2454, Winter 2022, inside of the Twitter Start, and say, hey, I want this MySQL connector jar. And if I use a relative path here, it says, oh, okay, it's in the same directory here. Using an absolute path is going to make that harder to use other places, right? So relative is nice here. Probably easiest for us to add that jar file. Right, and then we've got our main page here. So now we're going to go into sources here. Let's add a package. And we'll call this our Twitter package. Oh, sorry, lowercase. Our conventional packages. And inside of that, then let's add a servlet. We'll call this one Twitter. Yes, definitely add that to your web XML. We don't want to do that by hand. So we should be able to go to /Twitter. And then in our web page here, might as well add a link, right? We'll just have a little href to Twitter. Maybe we should come up with a better name for it, but it's probably okay. And we'll start and just make sure our servlet is up and running. We can get to it. Things look good. Tomcat started up okay. Give it a check. Make sure it gets deployed. See how it goes here. Selected browser cannot be run. Really? That's interesting. Oh, it did run though. Okay, that's weird. So Twitter. There you go. Servlet Twitter at Twitter start. Okay, so looking good so far. So we got connected. So then what we want to do is we need to now figure out how we can connect to the database. And again, we're going to do this in more of this model view controller style approach. So I'm going to add a Java class here. Excuse me, for, we'll say, the database connection. And for our database connection, now this is where we'll go and try and connect to that database. So I'm actually going to go look at my other example here, do some copy pasting, because why not? It's kind of annoying otherwise. And what we're going to do is we're going to just have a static connection we're going to return. So you can just get this connection out of this class. You don't need an instance of it or anything. Yep, gets this one here. And this one, did it not find the jar? It should have found it here. SQL exception. I just have to build the package here. Okay, there it goes. It took a second. So one of the weird things, depending on what version you're running, and this is awkward a lot of times, but you have to force Java to say, hey, please use this driver for connecting to MySQL server. So com.mysql.jdbc.driver is what we're going to load out of that jar, essentially, out of here. So com.mysql.jdbc is in here, and we're going to load the driver class. So there's all sorts of other cool stuff in here. Don't worry about it here. But in that package, we've downloaded the jar, has the driver class. And the driver is what we're going to use to do all of this connectivity stuff. Okay? So we use this to force it. And then the syntax here is the driver here, then the URL and the port, and the database. So jdbc:/MySQL is the driver we're going to use. The URL and the port are localhost 3306, should be the standard for MySQL Server. And then the database name here was Twitter Winter 2022. And then we need to go set up a username and password. Right? We want to make sure we're having good practices here. So we'll have a particular user. So we'll go back to our home page here. And we'll go to user accounts and we'll set up a Twitter user here. Let me just make a new one here. We'll follow the same steps. So we'll call it Twitter Winter 2022 and password. I'm just going to use test. It's a terrible idea, right? But this is just for our local purposes, right? This is just test. They don't get any global privileges, none. Remember, we want to give them database specific permissions. So we'll create the user, and then at the database level, we'll say, okay, hey, for the Twitter Winter 2022 database, we're going to give you some permissions, and we want to give you just access to select, insert, update, and delete. If you want to get specific, you could take away delete permissions and say, hey, you're not allowed to delete data, right? Because most of the time, we're not going to delete stuff. Twitter does allow you to delete tweets, so maybe that's fine. Another way of maybe being proper about that, instead of even deleting it, you could have a field in your table that says, hey, is deleted or not, or is active or not, depending whether or not you actually want to remove the data or if you want to keep it around for some sort of audit purposes. We got all sorts of options there, but we'll allow deleting, and we'll call that good. So go. So we've granted permissions. So our user here then, in our code, again, this is terrible. We don't have time for the better ways right now. So Twitter Winter 2022, password is just test here. And we should be able to return this connection. So the connection is the object we're going to use to go and do all of these things here. So then, why does it not like this one? There it goes. Okay, one more import here for the driver manager. So these are standard Java packages, but we're loading the specific driver here. from that other library, which is pretty cool. So there's a built-in SQL library that Java just knows how to do SQL, because SQL is a standard here that you can use across multiple different relational database management systems. This one specifically knows how to talk to the MySQL software. You can get different drivers for talking to Oracle databases. You can get different drivers talking to Microsoft SQL Server databases. You can get different drivers for connecting to Postgres databases. And there's all sorts of other ones as well. You can find different drivers for them. So then what we want to do is we want to have a way to sort of represent some of these values here. So let's actually go in and go to our user table and add a user for now. So let's go and insert some data just so we have a user. So we'll have the user, how about test and password. I'm going to leave blank for right now. We'll come back to how we can actually deal with that later. So we have test in here now. And if we look at the data, it should be ID number 1. So we can make up a tweet here. So if we insert into the tweet table now, ID will leave blank. It'll auto-populate. The text here, it will say this, I don't know, our first tweet. And then the user ID, we can either use the drop-down here, right, which is really nice, it builds in. And then for timestamp, it's even suggesting we just say current timestamp, which is really nice. We can look at how we can work in code with that later, but in the PHP MyAdmin tool, it's giving us this is current timestamp. Will give us the current timestamp. So we can actually use this. This is a built-in function in MySQL Server to say, hey, whatever the current time is, let's put it in. So now if we look at the actual data, we'll see, hey, it's actually translating it into local time here for us behind the scenes, because PHP MyAdmin is cool and does that for us. But this is a timestamp. So the actual value here is a numeric value of number of, is it milliseconds since the Unix epoch or something, which is a crazy way of tracking dates and times, but sure, you can do that sort of thing. All right, so now we got a tweet. So now we want to see if we can get some tweets back out, right? So I want to write a class here then for user, and I want to write a class here for tweet, right? We want to follow this nice little model here. So the tweet class then has a private int for the ID. It has a private string for the message, or the text. I forget what we called it here. Probably should make it match. Tweet has, we called it text. Okay, cool, text. And then a timestamp. So dealing with timestamps is a little bit funny here, but we should be able to use date and time, I believe. Or is it timestamp in Java? Timestamp in Java. Okay, yeah. So java.sql gives us a timestamp here, which is pretty cool. And we'll call that timestamp, and then a private int for the user ID here. Now, we're sort of mixing and matching whether or not we want to use the snake casing with these underscores, if we want to use the every next word camel casing gets a capital letter. However you want to do it, go for it. I think in the database we used the snake casing. Yeah, user underscore ID. So I want to just make it match here. It might not follow our Java standards, but I want to try and be consistent. Otherwise, I'll go crazy here. Then what we want to do is generate some code. Right? We need ways to get all these values back out. So I'm going to go insert some code. I want to insert getters for everything. We'll insert all those getters. And then I want to make a constructor. So this is easy for me to make one of these new things. We'll say, just give me everything. We can always come back to these later here. We can make one maybe without the timestamp as well if we wanted. That might be easy when we're making new tweets, or we've got some options here, however we want to do that. For now, we'll just do this one here. So that's our tweet class that represents a tweet. Then for user, right, we need the attributes for user. So private int for ID, private string for username, and a private string for password. Right, again, add the constructors, or the getters and the constructors here. Get and a constructor. Sure, you give me all of those things, we'll create a user for you. Life is good. So now we need a way to go and get the list of users right out. So we have the user class. How do we get a list of users out of the database? So we really need this sort of users model in here now. So I'm going to have a new class here for user model. naming gets a little funny here, but so user represents a single user. The user model is how we talk to it. So the user model will have, how about a public array list of type user called get users. We can return all of the users here in an array list. So we first need the connection. So we need a connection equals my database connection dot get connection. Semicolons. There we go. Add our import here. So we can get the connection here. And now it's yelling at us saying, hey, we have to try catch, because bad stuff could happen here. So we have to throw this in a try and catch block here. And then we're going to catch, is it a SQL exception? I think it is. We'll print out the exception, add our import for SQL exception. Sure, why not? Is that not it? I got the wrong one here. Oh, and also a class not found exception. You can get either one here. You know, I'm just going to cheat and say, hey, exception. Remember, like everything is an exception at some point. It's not ideal here. Right? We probably should do the multiples, but this will be fine here. And what we can do is I can make the array list of type user. Say this users equals a new array list of type users here. And then regardless of whether or not we get an exception or not, we can just return that user's array list. Right? If this fails, we'll just return an empty list. If it's successful, we can return the actual list. Okay? So dealing with our users, and how do we go and get out that user information here? So we follow the same sort of process like we do in PHP land. So we're going to make a statement. So we have a statement. We'll just call it a statement equals, now we get it from the connection.create statement here. And then the statement, we're going to give a query. Yes, we got to add more imports here. Thank you. Sure. Why not? Oh, look, we don't even need that one anymore. Hooray. So from there, then, what we get back here is a result set. So result set is that essentially the two-dimensional list here. What we're getting in PHP, this is a particular class here, we'll call it results, is my statement.execute query, and we give it the string. What's the query here? Well, ours is select star from user. And we add an import for result set. Sure, why not? Okay. Then what we need to do, once we have those results, now we need to go and get the individual rows out, get their pieces of data, and turn them into user objects. So we can say while results.next. Results.next says, hey, as long as there's something to read here, I don't know how many results I got back, but as long as I have some, I'm going to have an int for ID is results. Now, here we go. So with Java being a strongly typed language, right, we can get out all sorts of different values here. I can get integers, I can get booleans, I can get bytes, I can get dates, I can get all sorts of fun things here. Strings, whatever I want out here. So for username, I want to get int. And then what we give it here is what is the name of the field. So I'm going to say, hey, there should be a field named ID in that table that I get back my results. I should have a field for ID. Let's double check I did that right. Columns. We get ID, password, and username. Sure. So we'll get out the ID. Here, we'll set that as the ID here. And then I need a string for username is results.getString. And where do I want to get that? I want that from username. And then a string for password. And actually, I'm wrong here. I should be calling these password hash, but because we're not actually going to store the real password here. Apologies for that. We'll say password. So we'll get the ID, we'll get the username, we'll get the password. Then I can make a user. So user equals a new user. Right? Using that class we made here, we'll give it the ID, the username, and the password. Then I'll take that user and I'll add it to my users list. So users.add the user. And as long as I have a result here, we'll go. So this is one row at a time, just like we were doing in PHP. We loop through that result set, get the individual, the second dimension essentially, get that row out, get each value out of the row, turn into a user, we're good to go. When that's done, then we're going to close the results. Then we're going to close the statement. Then we're going to close the connection. Right? Close all those. Okay, so to get all the users out, I will come back and add some more operations here in a little bit, but this should be good for here. And then in our Twitter servlet here, right, this is serving as our controller. Right, we want to see if we get a request, what do we want to do? Well, I need to go and get all the users out, and then I want to just hand it over to a JSP to display. So I don't want to do any of this stuff here. Get rid of all that nonsense. We'll have a JSP we're going to add. So we'll go to our web pages and add a new JSP for users. Okay, so we can add this one in here, and then we need to go and add our core library. Let me go find that one again here, because again, I'm just going to copy and paste everything. I don't remember what the whole name of that tag was here. There it is. We'll say, okay, let's call this, this is the JSTL core, let's call it C in here, and then remember you have to go add that library as well. So go find the library for JSTL, go add the JSTL library so we have access to it, and then in our JSP now, we can set this up. So we'll have, how about a table here? Sure, inside the body. So we'll set up a table. Maybe we have to label this one too here, slash table. Probably a good idea. So we'll say, how about an H2, this is users. And then we'll start a table. We'll have a table row. That table row then will have these table headers. And each one of that, this will be ID, and then one for username, and then one for password. Again, this should be the hash here, which is fine. We'll get to that. Username and password. I'm going to put in hash here when I'm describing it. That should be fine. That's our row. And then we want to do that loop, right? We want to go through each value here. So we'll use a for each loop here. I'm just going to copy paste in some here. We'll say for each user in the users object here. We'll get the ID, we'll get the username. Is a name uppercase? I'm trying to remember here now. Username was all lowercase. Sure, why not? Username, and then password here. We'll do that for each of these items here, right? Each one of them becomes a row where we're just outputting their value. Right? If we use cout here, we get the nice formatting as well, which is really handy for us. Because we want to do the escaping. I don't know what the user is going to give us, but you can get some funky stuff. Right, and when that's all done, we'll end the table. And again, we can add some more forms and other things like that for now, but this should be good here. So then in my controller, I'm going to say, hey, I want an array list of type user. Well, this users is my user model dot, oops, this should probably be a static method here. User model dot get users. And yes, we can add an import here. Thank you. And then we're going to go and forward that request on over to the user's the user's view here. Give me just a second. I got to go find how we even forward that again. There we go. So we'll set the attribute here, right? The user's object. We'll call it users. We'll get the URL for where we're going. This was just users.jsp. And then we'll get the server context, get the request dispatcher, and forward it on over. Again, we need other things here, and this shouldn't be the only thing we're doing, but this is we're getting our start. Get that little format, and see if we can't get that list of users out. The controller says, oh, okay, you want to go to our page? Sure. Go and get the users, ask the model for the data, add it to the request, and then send it over to the view to be displayed, right, following that MVC model. So let's give it a shot. See if it works here. All right, so here's our Twitter page. I don't know why I didn't open the other one. We'll go to the servlet. And servlet grabs the data, sends it over to the JSP, and displays it. So now we have our users list. And we didn't have a password, so sure, it was fine. We didn't actually go and set one for our poor little user here. And we're going to do that after, I think, when we looked at our user data. Yeah, we left it blank. We could go figure out what we're going to do after. So we need to figure out how we can get passwords out, and we'll do that in a little while. We can worry about that. We haven't talked about sessions and cookies yet, so we won't worry about how we can actually get users logged in. We'll do that next week. I just wanted to set up a little bit of this database connectivity here. So then our users model, this is for getting users, right? What other things do we want to do with users? Well, we can add a user, right? So let's add a new method here then. Public static void add user. And maybe a Boolean here, but this is probably fine here. So if you give me a user, I'll go add the user. So again, we need the connection here. So this is going to go in a try block because bad stuff could happen. And so we set up the connection here. We'll close all those in a minute. We get the statement. I want the statement here. Creating a statement. But I'm sorry, so I actually don't want to do a regular statement. So when we're adding data, right, we want to avoid those issues with SQL injection. If the user gives me something bad here, I want to make sure it's sanitized before it goes into the database. So I'm going to have a prepared statement. Prepared statement here. We'll just call it statement equals a connection dot prepare statement. Prepare statement. Now the prepared statement needs the SQL, the string here. So I can put it in here, or maybe it's a little easier to have. This is my query, is insert into user. Right, and we're going to tell it what columns. We have username and we have password. Right, we're skipping the user ID. And then what we're going to give it is values, and then we use question marks for the substitution places here. So very similar to our PHP, right? We're going to give it, hey, please substitute in here, please substitute in here for whatever the username and password is. I give that query to prepare the statement. Then we're going to go and say, okay, let's do our substitutions, just like we did over in PHP land. This is statement dot, now we're going to say set string here. So again, we're specific types. And 1 is the first index. I don't know why. Indexing starts with 1. Why? It's okay to cry. I don't know why it does that. It's awful. We can cry about it. But 1 is the first substitution instead of being 0-based like everything else is in, Java land. I have no idea. And then statement.setString of 2. And what do we want to substitute it with? Oh, sorry, not the query here. We're going to take the user.getUsername. Right? And for the password, user.getPassword. Right? We can go add those. So then to execute so we've prepared it, we haven't run it yet. So then we'll call statement.execute. Then we can close the statement, close the connection. Go and run it here. We should be able to add a user then in. So in our view here, maybe we can add a form for them to add a user, right? So we could have a form, and I think we've done this before in our PHP land. So let's just go copy paste. So we'll go to our repo here, 54. What do we say, like add user or something? It's got to be in here somewhere. Add user? Really? We've done this. We've done this. All right, hang on. Let's see. Store project v3. Look at our, is this the login page? Do we have a create views for login? Yeah, okay, here's a form. Sure, why not? We'll take this one. So I have a form for login. Okay, so maybe we don't actually want login here. Maybe we want this to be, this is going to go to Twitter. We're going to post it. We have a username. We have a password. So maybe we'll call this one create user. So we have create user form. And then we need a hidden input. Type is hidden. Name is action. And value is create user. Right, so we can say, hey, let's create a user for username and password here, or register user, I don't know, whatever you want to call it here. And then we can look for that value here for our actions. So we can go get the action out. So we can have a string for the action is my request.getParameter action. And if my action is null, then I'm going to say action equals, how about list users, right? And then we can say, hey, if my action equals ignoring case list users, right? We can go do the list user thing here. If it's not, right, else if, how about if it's create user? Create user, I think is what we called it. Right, create user, sure. Okay, so then we need to go and get those values back out. So let's take our request. We'll get the parameter for username. That'll be a string for username. Request get parameter. And then a string for password is request get parameter, get the password. Right, now we need to go and figure out, well, what do we do with it? Right, I don't have an easy built-in way right now of doing the hash. There's not a super nice one here. So what we've done before, we'll just go steal this again from a Geeks for Geeks site here. How do we get a SHA-256 hash? This is a relatively fine hashing algorithm. We can go steal. Let's go take their whole algorithm here, which is, both of this is a little bit messy here, but we're just going to add some stolen methods here. My goodness, add all the imports. Yes, add all the imports, please. Add imports, add imports, add imports. I don't know, I stole this a while back, last time. So it does this thing here. This is password. Isn't that it? Oh, okay, yeah, we gotta put this in a try-catch block here in a second. So you give it a password, and it gives you back whatever this bytes standard encoded is as a message digest using the SHA-256 hash. Sure. And then we turn that into a hex string, so we give it a bunch of bytes, and we get a hexadecimal string here. Sure, why not? This is a way we found online to hash a password, so we'll use it. So all this has to go in a try-catch block here in a second, so we'll put all this in a try-catch. Go. So we get the username and password, we'll try, and then we'll catch. Just an exception again for now. This is the lazy approach, I apologize, but it's okay. Firebug, thank you so much for the reminder to hydrate. I have not had enough coffee today, as you can tell. Thank you, my friend. How you doing tonight? So we'll try and get the hashed password out. Once we've got that, then we should be in pretty good shape. But we probably also want to do some quick checking here, right? If username equals null or password equals null, oh my goodness, equals. I keep hitting the backspace. Either one of those is null. We should, to do send to error page. We don't have an error page yet. That's something we can tackle after, right? Not too big of a deal. All right, I'm feeling bad. Let's just go add a web page here. We'll add a little JSP for error here, and we'll just, sure. And we just want to output whatever the error message is. We'll say error. That's not the right syntax here, is it? That's not going to work. That's not even an N and H one. We'll do that in the paragraph. How about that? So I'm using, is that on the wrong side? There we go, $error, there we go. Oh, thank you so much, Firebug. Good to see you, my friend. Hope you guys are doing well. All right, so we should be able to output some sort of error. Sure, okay, now we won't feel too bad about this. And if we get an error, we'll send them to, I don't know, we'll say a string for error equals username or password. Missing? Sure, why not? And then we'll do our same, send them to error.jsp. Why not? Forward them on. And this isn't great. We should have some sort of header. We haven't built all that stuff out yet. We're getting there. We're just trying to get the database stuff down to start. So once we got that, then we can make a user. Right? User equals a new user. Now the ID we don't care about, so I'm just going to leave it 0, but then we want the username, we want the hashed password. Okay? And then we can call our model. Right? That was our user model. Create user, what is it? Add user, given the user. When we're done, right, we want to essentially bounce them back, right? Because this should be a post request to the page here. We want to bounce them back to our own page here so that we can list users out, right? So we don't want to forward the request. What was the difference here? We had forward or redirect, JSP redirect. There we go. Let's try this one here because I'm not remembering what we did before it. Redirect. Response.send redirect. Okay, sure. Send redirect. Easy enough. Response.send redirect. to Twitter. It should bounce them back to our servlet, hopefully. And then we should go and list that new user out. Should we try it? Let's give it a try here. So we'll go to the Twitter servlet. We can create a user. So we already have a user for test here. So how about we have a user for Eric, password. I'm just going to put in test for right now. Let's see what we get. Creates the user, adds in this is the password hash. Fantastic. So we can create a user. Working pretty good so far. Updating a user, I'm going to put in here. It's probably not the right operation, but that's okay. We want to have some sort of example here. We can go with that. So we'll make a public static void update user, given a user. Now, same idea. It's basically the same thing here. But our command is going to change. So we're going to say update user, and we're going to say set username equal to something, right? Question mark, comma, password to something. And then we need the where clause, where ID is equal to something. Right? So we're going to set the username, we're going to set the password, as long as you give me an ID. This is probably kind of funny here, but sure, we can update fields here. This is just sort of the example. Now we're going to bind username, we're going to bind password, and then we need to also statement.setInt here for index 3 to the user.get ID. Get ID. Okay, we'll go run that query and give it a shot. So in our form here, then how about we have an update user option. We don't want the whole form here. That's right. That's a weird. That didn't format right, did it? Okay, there's our form. So we'll have an update user, and then to update the user, we need a user ID, right? So we need an ID, and then we'll call that ID, username and password. This is for action of update user. So then in the controller, we'll go look for, well, what happens if they send me an update user action? So else if our action is update user. In here. Else if it's update user. I need to get out all of these. So I'll have an int for ID is request.get parameter. There it is. My goodness. ID. And I need that as to be parsed here, right? Integer.parseInt. Given the ID here. And then, again, probably want to check if ID equals 0. I'm not, I think null won't parse, and it might crash anyway, but we'll see what happens. It might just end up crashing if we give it nothing here. So, okay, maybe we'll leave that here first. We'll have a string for ID. We'll get the ID out, because this is going to be a little safer here. So I can say, hey, if the ID is null first, then we can do all of those things. And then get the hashed password. And now the ID here now becomes integer.parseInt of the ID here. And now we're going to call update user in the model, given the user. Redirect them back to Twitter. Again, probably need to do some sort of checking here that they're actually the right user. We're just trying to do some basic examples here. See if we can't get this to work. So to update a user, let's update user 1. We'll leave their username as test, and then how we put in the new password of test. And now does test and test hash to the same. So remember, hashing is not perfect. Doing something with salts is a good practice here so that you're getting it's mixed up a little bit. If I know that you're using the SHA-256 hash, I can just hash a bunch of known words and see if I can match a hash to find out what the password is. Again, that's kind of beyond what we're doing right now, a little bit beyond the scope of this. Okay. Then the last thing we want to do is delete a user. Right? Look at those basic CRUD operations. We want to create, we want to read, we want to update, and we want to delete. Okay. So let's go add in the user's model a delete method. We want a delete user. Delete user. Now our query changes here. We say delete from user where ID equals something. That's it. And the only thing we need to bind then is the ID here. We're going to execute that and delete the user. So you give me the user. I'm going to ignore username and password. All I need is the ID here. We'll go and delete the user. So we can go add another form here for delete user. This can be delete user, and the only thing I need here then is the ID. You just tell me the ID here, and I'll go delete them for a delete user action. Right, we can go and do that one. I don't know, maybe we bump that down. I don't know if we should have new lines here or not for these hiddens. Sure, why not? All right, so then in our controller, we'll go, okay, what do we do if we get a delete user request? Okay, well, basically this, right? Else if delete user. I need the ID. If the ID is null, we error out. ID is missing. Oh, sorry, we should have fixed our error over here. So this should be ID or username or password is missing, sure. Oh, we never set the error, sorry. So then we need to set that error in here. So we need a request set attribute. Error to error. There we go. So we should set the attribute to error here if we're actually going to error, if we want them to have an error message. It was telling me it was never used before, so that's just what's helpful here. All right, then we don't need to get the password. We can make a user, but all we need is the ID here. The username and password don't matter, so I can just do empty strings. As long as it is a string, it's fine, and we'll call delete user. And redirect them back. Again, if we could probably actually do a better thing here. If we get that exception, we could probably do the same sort of thing, set the error as the exception message. That might be a little cleaner here. So let's do that. So we'll do this one here instead. So our error will be exception to string. Hector, my friend, thank you so much for donating those bits to the Student Scholarship Fund over the University of Michigan Dearborn College of Engineering and Computer Science. Man, my friend, thank you so much for coming on by and being so generous. That's so awesome of you. All right, so I'll do the same try catch everywhere, essentially. You know what, how about we take, because I don't want to do the same code twice, I'm going to do this refactor, and I want to extract method. Or no, introduce method. Here we go, introduce method. We'll call this, let's send to exception, or handle exception. Forward, I don't even know. Exception page. Sure, exception page. Why not? We can do this exception page thing in all of these try catches here. So if anything happens now, we should get sort of a better message here as we're getting sent to that exception page. Okay, cool. Let's try that. We should be able to delete a user. Let's give that one a shot. Uh-oh. What is it? Already being serviced. Let's try that again. Okay. I think that worked. Got another tab here. I didn't open my other tab. That's fine. We'll go to the Twitter page. All right, we can delete a user, so let's make another user here. So let's do, I don't know, test2, test2. Notice the hash is different with test2, and we want to delete a user. Let's delete user 3. Oh, it said login. Oops, we probably should change some of those buttons here. So this is delete. Oops, nope, no, sorry, the value here. Delete user. This one should be update user. And this one should be add user or create user. I like add user actually. Right, is that what we called it here? Do we call it add user? Yeah, add user. Okay. We fixed up the JSP. That should be a little prettier now. There we go. Add user, update user, delete user. Cool, and they seem to work. So we can do our basic CRUD operations just like we did over in PHP land in Java. Right? Kind of use this connection thing, force the driver, use that in your model, then do all these try-catch things, set up the statements, swap the variables in, right? Make sure we're getting our SQL injection attack protection, and we can go from there. So it's a little fast here, but we've already done database connectivity in web applications. We're just looking at how do we get it in the Java syntax. Does that make sense? And at this point, I think we're good with labs. If you'd like a lab for practice, go for it. I can definitely give you some more practice, but I think starting and working on our Twitter project would be a good start here. So like Not all of this is actually proper, right? You don't want to just randomly go and delete users and update users and this sort of thing here. I just want to give you some example here. But the user table and the tweet table, we can start building out and start looking at some of those. Can we list out tweets, that sort of thing? Now, from here, we should be able to start being able to add tweets. You'll have to tell it what the user ID is, but that's okay for now. We can fix that. Next week, when we look at sessions, we can say, oh, how do we know who's logged in? How do we verify their password matches, get them logged in, add that the session attribute there, like the cookies like we were doing over in PHP land. And we'll look at that next week. And then we're just cruising along.